4,155 pages containing $1.7 trillion worth of surely wonderful government spending. That's what we all get for Christmas, courtesy of our benevolent overlords in Congress. But wait, this is not another video about where the money is going. We're not going to sit here and complain about page 3,124 that contained a $65 billion carve-out to study the effects of climate change on the implicit biases of cisgendered plankton. No, if you want to have that conversation, feel free to put that down in the comments below, and I thank you for the engagement. But rather than sit here and complain about where the money is going, what we need to be asking ourselves is, where is this money going to come from? Because all the places the government has historically borrowed money from in the past is no longer willing to lend to the U.S. government, namely the Federal Reserve, China, and Japan. The three largest holders of U.S. government debt are currently net sellers of U.S. treasuries. In other words, Congress is running out of people to borrow from. And look no further than this article here in Global Macro Monitor. Foreign central bank treasury dump continues. And I want to zero in on this paragraph here, Japan and China selling. Last week's TIC data confirms foreign central banks are still dumping their treasury note and bond holdings. Japan and China, both private and official, are the two largest foreign creditors to the U.S. Treasury, reduced their note and bond holdings by $217 billion from August to October of this year, the largest 3-month dump on record. So if Congress thinks that the government or the central banks in China and Japan are going to buy this stuff, they got another thing coming. And that's not to mention another source where historically Congress has been able to buy money from, and that is Japanese private investors. Check out this one in Asia Times. Japan rate pivot means higher U.S. bond yields. The Bank of Japan's December 20th decision to lift the cap on 10-year government bond yields to 0.5% from 0.25% looks on the surface like a minor tweak of monetary policy, but in reality, it's a hairline crack in the biggest dam in world financial markets. Japan is the world's #1 creditor, a massive exporter of capital to the United States and other borrowing countries. Now the Bank of Japan wants to bring Japan's money home to finance a massive government deficit that will be aggravated by a 50% rise in defense spending over the next 5 years. This implies higher bond yields in the United States, which can't count on the Japanese bid for its government bonds during the next several years. And let's not forget about the single largest holder of U.S. government debt, the Federal Reserve. Well, you see this chart above my melon here that's headed downward ever so slightly? That's because the Federal Reserve is currently engaged in quantitative tightening. In other words, they are net sellers of U.S. government debt. So this $1.7 trillion in spending from Congress, it's not going to come from the Fed either. So who does the government have left to borrow from? Well, this chart here shows all the various holders of U.S. Treasury debt. In other words, this is all the people and organizations who have been lending money to the U.S. government. This line down here in blue, that's the Federal Reserve and other government accounts. We've already established they're not going to be able to borrow any more from them. Foreign central banks, nope, they're net sellers. So who's left? Well, namely, we've got mutual funds, depository institutions, pension funds, and other. In other words, who is the government going to borrow this money from? You. Your retirement, your pension, your mutual funds. That's who. And that should worry you, because right now, mutual funds and pension funds and retirement plans, they don't have a lot of money left to lend to the government. If the supply is tight and the demand is high, then the price rises. And what is the price of money? Well, the price of money is interest rates. You see this chart right here? This is the U.S. 10-year Treasury yield. This is the benchmark interest rate that the whole world of debt is based on. And you notice going all the way back to the beginning of this year, this thing has been heading higher, and with a couple of minor exceptions, it has not stopped to catch its breath, marching higher virtually all year long. And now with the government creating even more supply of bonds, i.e. even more demand for money, even though the supply of money is shrinking as the Fed tightens and as foreign central banks dump their U.S. government bonds, that means another spike in interest rates could be just around the corner. That means this chart is going higher. And that should worry you for a couple of reasons. The first reason that should worry you is the housing market. Take a look at this chart right here. U.S. existing home sales currently just barely above 4 million homes a month being sold in the United States right now. That is the lowest level since May of 2020 at the height of the pandemic. And you notice if you take away that data point, you got to go all the way back to the global financial crisis to find a housing market that was as frozen as it is right now. And the main reason these home sales are drying up is because interest rates are going higher, mortgages have become unaffordable, and home prices are so high that people can't afford the payments on those mortgages. So if interest rates continue marching higher, then it is inevitable that home prices will crash. There's a lot of people out there who are saying real estate is not going to crash because it hasn't crashed yet. Well, that'll be true right up until it isn't. Another reason you should worry is this chart right here, America's credit card bill. Consumer credit in the United States currently just below $1 trillion. The cost of inflation has been causing Americans to go deeper and deeper into debt. The problem is credit card debt is adjustable rate debt. So as interest rates rise, the cost of this mountain of credit card debt is going to rise right along with it. And that means the American consumer is in for a shock as interest rates continue to rise and the cost of carrying this debt continues to rise right along with it. Sooner or later, Americans are going to wake up to see that their credit cards have been cut off and they can't buy anything anymore. And that will cause a crash in consumer spending, which is the main input to GDP here in the United States. So long story short, folks, it's not so much where the money is going that's the problem here. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure Pakistan is very grateful for the generous grant from the American people for gender studies in Pakistan. I'm sure that money is going to go to good use. But the real problem here is where is the money going to come from? And the people in Congress are still running by the old playbook where they can just endlessly borrow and China or Japan or the Fed will happily lend that money to them. That is no longer the case. The number of people and institutions in the world who are willing to lend to the United States government is significantly smaller than it used to be. And with all of this new borrowing in an already illiquid treasury market, it means those borrowing costs are going to rise even faster than they've been rising already. That means more stress on U.S. banks, more companies that go under as they refi into higher debt. That means American consumers getting bludgeoned over the head with an increase in their adjustable rate credit card debt. And that means even more stress in the housing market, which is already on the edge of a cliff. Until next time, live small and dream big.